Hello and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm Kevin Castley. I want to talk about in this video the bunk and junk meme that is often asked of the interventionists, the hawks, the neocons, which is, when are you joining the military though? It's a really dumb question. Basically, the premise is you have an opinion on foreign policy, yet you're not in the military. Therefore, your opinion is invalid. This is bunk and junk, and I'm going to debunk the legitimacy of this line of questioning in this video. So, to say you don't get an opinion on foreign policy, on war, etc., without being in the military is essentially to misunderstand and to lose sight of the specialization division of labor and to partake in that fallacy where you say, oh, unless you are actively making a career of the field in which you have an opinion on, you have no say in that field. It would essentially be the same as saying you can't have an opinion on whether marijuana should be legalized or not unless you are a judge, unless you literally work in the court and you're a judge. Okay. Or you can't have an opinion on health policy, on should we build a new hospital, for example, unless you are a doctor yourself. You can't have an opinion on whether money should be invested into cancer research unless you are a medical researcher. You can't have an opinion on whether money should be devoted to the firefighting service unless you're a firefighter. You can't have an opinion on crime and policing unless you yourself are a cop. Does that really sound reasonable in any way? Because all the time, those people that will phrase that question, when are you joining the military though? If they're coming from the right, if they're coming from the libertarian, the paleocon side, chances are you ask about Black Lives Matter, for example, they have an opinion about police. They have an opinion about police. If we're talking about the left, we're talking about the progressives, the anti-war aggressives out there, the aggressive gremlins. Well, they generally have an opinion about tax policy and what tax rate should be. Well, you're not an economist. You don't get a say on tax policy. There you go. So, but you have an opinion on the military. You have an opinion on warfare. You have an opinion on foreign policy. Well, you're not in the military. It misses another point too, which is that foreign policy relates in terms of the theory, the underlying theory of it, to international relations as a field of study. And that has, at the end of the day, some overlap, though not that much overlap to the skills that goes into being, say, for example, a soldier or, an airman or a sonar officer, for example. Those are things that you could combine. You could, for example, be in the Navy and then go on to get an international relations degree or do both at the same time, for example. And yes, your experience here can inform your experience there and vice versa. However, they are at the end of the day very different fields. It's kind of like saying, oh, you're an economist. You must know everything about business or vice versa. It's like, no, running a business and being an economist are two pretty different fields. You could do both or you could do one or the other, right? Likewise with international relations and working in the military. At the end of the day, the military is a job, just as being a firefighter or being a police officer is a very important and crucial job. But just because you're not particularly in that specific field doesn't mean that you don't, that your particular opinion on something isn't actually valid. Now, this has another side to it too, which is that the question is basically implying, oh, well, you're a coward, essentially, if you're not in the military. The thing is, what's implied there is that if you were in the military and now you have an opinion on foreign policy, that your opinion is not only valid, but it's the only opinion that's valid, because only those that are in the military get to have an opinion on foreign policy. Oh, well, that's kind of interesting then. Because those in the hawkish community and the neocon community probably take that deal then, because it turns out the vast majority of people in the armed forces understand and are hawk-pilled better than even a lot of the hawks that come on this show, for example. You know, I mean, a lot of people that are in the military, you ask them what should be done here or there, they're probably going to go with a kinetic force, like, oh, bomb them, you know, or apply force there, for example, have a presence there. That's the best way to ward off terrorism, that kind of thing. They tend to be far more hawkish than the average person out there. And so it essentially raises a question of, well, if only those that are in the military can have a say over a crucial aspect of government, you know, the foreign policy of a country, then does that ultimately mean that these people want to live in a military junta? You know, they just let the generals take over. Who needs a president anymore? That kind of thing, because only those that are in the military get to have a say on stuff. That sounds like kind of a dystopic sort of world. But of course, we need to understand that, yes, well, that's the implication, what they're asking. That's not actually what they're trying to do here. Their actual motive is to delegitimize and dismiss and get us to question our own stances around things and our own convictions. They're essentially trying to dismiss any position that they disagree with, because if we bring John McCain here and John McCain says, oh, you know, the war in Iraq was good, the surge worked, they'll say, well, are you in the military though? When are you joining the military though? And then John McCain would say, I was in the military, I'm a decorated war hero. And then they'll say, oh, well, you're a war criminal, so I don't have to listen to you now either. That's basically how they do this. You know, you're either a coward or you're a war criminal. Either way, they don't have to listen to you. So the moral and the takeaway from that is, don't join the military if you want to try to gain legitimacy with our opponents. They'll have, in many ways, less respect for you if you do than if you don't, because they think that the military is a bunch of war criminals and baby killers, basically. They're not on our side at the end of the day. They simply don't have our interests at heart. They view the armed forces of the West as the perpetrators of crimes against humanity. These are people who simp for tin pot despots, like Tanky Tulsi Gabbard, who admires Bashar the Butcher over in Syria. Now, there is an exception here that they'll say, you know, when are you joining the military? There is one exception that they'll make, which is that you only get a say on foreign policy if you were in the military and your position also happens to agree with them, like Tanky Tulsi Gabbard or Jesse Ventura. They both have a very anti-American foreign policy, but they were in America's military, so therefore their opinion is valid. But everybody else, the vast bulk of the United States military, that's pretty hawkish. Oh, they don't count because they're war criminals. Only the good ones count. How convenient is that? So I hope what we've essentially served to do here is illustrate just how absolutely asinine and how absolutely ridiculous the question, the retort is when you mention anything about your foreign policy position. If you talk about how we need to deal with Iran or need to deal with North Korea, and their response is, well, when are you joining the military though? It's a complete non-starter. They've essentially proven they have no idea what they're talking about. They have committed several fallacies there, the specialization and division of labor fallacy, for one. And and we can see very clearly here that, you know, if we're going to have it be that way, if we're going to say, okay, only those that are in the military get to have a position on foreign policy, I'll tell you what, I'll take a deal with the Tulsi fans, with the Kremlin Kyle Kulinski fans, and say, yeah, you know what, fair deal. I don't get an opinion on foreign policy anymore. Only those that are in the military do. Because guess what? We'll probably have an even more hawkish foreign policy than if I'm in charge at that point. Because that's the military's job. They know what they're doing, essentially. And then they're trained to be the best in the world at applying force to deal with the threats to the country. Oh, surprise. It turns out that they're pretty hawkish because they've seen the threats to the country firsthand with their own eyes, as opposed to sitting in a basement somewhere watching Chapo Trap House like you. So, so thank you for watching, everybody. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I do daily streams and daily premieres. Have a good day.